2024 was quite a year for me discovering and watching new films, finding many films I had never seen before, a good number of which I really enjoyed. Out of all of those films, I have picked out 10 which I thought were the very best, and I am going to share them with you guys, giving some of my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations on them. These films did not come out in 2024 or anything, they are just 10 of the best films that I watched for the first time in 2024. While talking about the films, I'm going to try and remain as spoiler free as possible so I can avoid potentially ruining them for people who haven't seen them before and would like a chance to view them as spoiler free as possible. But be as free as you like in the comments, as I always find it interesting hearing other people's opinions. Now, this list isn't in any particular order, so the actual placement has nothing to do with which ones I preferred more or less. I simply picked 10 of my most favourite films I watched this year. Starting off strong, we have William Friedkin's The Sorcerer. The Sorcerer from 1977 was quite the discovery for me. Before watching it in 2024, I had never even heard of it before. I only found out about it after looking through Friedkin's IMDb page to see if there were any other films I would like from him. This is because I love The French Connection, which I watch at least once every year and is one of my favourite movies ever. I have this policy where if I typically like one director's work, I will go and watch their other stuff, and that's how I came across The Sorcerer. Honestly, I had no idea what to expect from this film, as I was going in completely blind, apart from the small description about the film, the cool name the film had, and the sick posters. I'm glad I watched this film, because it was excellent, from the story about a bunch of troubled individuals winding up in South America having to transport highly dangerous explosives in order to help an oil company that's having some major issues with the local populace, to despicable characters that at the start you are apprehensive about, but by the end you can't help but root for. Those characters are played by a surprisingly well picked and diverse cast of actors. Obviously, Roy Schneider is a standout. He is someone who I always think is a bit underrated, and here he shines, giving a wonderful and at times manic performance. I also thought Bruno Cremer and Francisco Rabal were great, two actors I had never heard of before this film. Outside of that, the film excels in many moments, having a great amount of tension that keeps you hooked, especially that bridge scene. If you know, you know. That bridge scene was so good that I actually refused to look up how they did it because I don't want to ruin the illusion that it puts up. I found the story to be especially interesting and engaging as well. Many of the underlying political intentions were a nice undercurrent for the main story about the fellas bringing the explosives along, and, while it's not quite what I expected, I was more than happy with it. I know the movie is based on a book which already had a film made on it called Wages of Fear, which I haven't seen, but I'm very interested in checking out, especially because it got a new 4K restoration, which apparently looks amazing. From what I have read, the film had a pretty awful production and release, so it might be worth me looking into making a video on, but honestly it's a shame to hear, because it is a great film, one of the best surprises of 2024 for me. Next up is Tora from 1970. It's a World War II epic depicting the events of the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was an interesting Japanese-American co-production, and at one point even had Akira Kurosawa's involvement, although that didn't really work out for him. Tora was a film I had always heard about and had actually caught small parts of on TV before, but I had never watched it fully or chronologically until this year, when I finally got the time to sit down and actually watch it fully, and I was not disappointed, to say the least. The film starts off slowly, building up the events that crucially came before the main attack. This approach works because it gets you ready for something you already know is coming, letting you teeter on a knife's edge, waiting for it to happen. When the payoff finally does come, it's well worth the wait, as the attack on Pearl Harbor itself is amazingly done. At points I actually found it extremely shocking because of how well they managed to replicate it. Although the film isn't 100% perfect, it is the best attempt at recreating the attack on Pearl Harbor, and will probably remain the best attempt to try and recreate the famous attack that changed the world forever. No CGI or AI can ever replicate what was done on this film, truly a spectacle. If the film was just the attack, it would have been great as well, but that extra hour or so of build-up certainly helps the film. Since Tora is a huge war film that is more a retelling of the history on a grand cinematic scale, there isn't really much room for one central character to lead the story. This is something I am fine with personally, especially for historical epics, as they're trying to tell the history, and in doing so, some sacrifices do have to be made. Another issue with the characters is not many of them are played by top billing stars. Don't get me wrong, Tora has some notable actors like Martin Balsam, Jason Robards, and Joseph Cotton, but compare it to the cast of Midway, which has Charlton Heston, Henry Fonda, James Coburn, Robert Mitchum, and Toshiro Mifune. Although I'm not familiar enough with the Japanese actors to confidently say whether or not they are top stars for Japan or not. Regardless of all that, there is still some great acting, like the confirmation scene with Neville Brand. And one scene I really like is when the guy looks at the Asian kid, and while he doesn't say anything, you can just already see the distrust creeping into his mind. The scene is played perfectly, and it's smaller moments like that, combined with the big attack, that make the film great. I highly recommend it if you like war films and haven't seen it before, but I'll also put a cautionary recommendation for others, as it is not everybody's cup of tea. The Hustler from 1961, directed by Robert Rosen, was another one where I was going in completely blind, knowing nothing about the film. I'd never seen any of Robert Rosen's films before, so again, a complete unknown to me. What attracted me to The Hustler was Paul Newman, Poole, and again, the really cool original poster. Before even watching it, I had never heard anything about the film, or anyone of note ever talk about it, so I really had no idea what to expect. But I was surprised by the film for its tone and story being a lot darker than I expected. Overall, I enjoyed the story, but I think it got a lot weaker in the third act, and if the film had kept the same strength for the third act as it did the first and the second, I know I would have enjoyed it a lot more than I did. Paul Newman is the real standout of the film, giving a great performance, and he really brings his character to life. I also enjoyed Jackie Gleason as Minnesota Fats, which honestly is a really funny name, but apparently the character and name is based on a real person who had the nickname Minnesota Fats. Overall, it was a good film that is well worth watching, and I also recently found out it has a sequel called The Color of Money, which was directed by Martin Scorsese of all people, and has Paul Newman and Tom Cruise in the main roles, so definitely worth checking out at some point, since I don't see how you can go wrong with that combination. 2001: A Space Odyssey from 1968, directed by Stanley Kubrick. This film needs no introduction. All I need to say is, my mind was blown away. How the hell did they do that? They made this in 1968? How? Only ever watched this film on 4K or via film print, as anything other than that, and you're doing the film a disservice. It's one of the best films I've ever seen, and I should have watched it earlier, I know. The Train from 1964, directed by John Frankenheimer, was definitely a hidden gem for me. This World War II film focuses on the French resistance attempts to stop a German train loaded full of precious art treasures that's being taken from France to Germany, and it's one hell of an action-packed thrill ride. Again, The Train was a blind watch for me, although I was familiar with John Frankenheimer's work from Ronin and The French Connection 2, as well as Burt Lancaster and Peter Schofield, who played Sir Thomas More to perfection in A Man for All Seasons. Here, Schofield plays his character, Colonel Franz von Waldheim, to perfection again, playing a calculating and determined Nazi officer who is hell-bent on making sure the stolen artwork gets to Germany. He is contrasted well by Burt Lancaster's character, Paul Leshib, the reluctant station master who throughout the course of the film becomes the arch-nemesis to Schofield's Waldheim. The two play off each other perfectly, and the back and forth they have throughout the film is a joy to watch. They are two opposing sides of the war, having completely different personalities that constantly clash. Their interactions often reminded me of a classic western with the fight between good and evil. What's also a joy to watch is the killer action using the trains. To my knowledge, they actually use real trains when blowing them up and derailing them, which makes the scenes look even better compared to if they used miniatures or something else. Even 60 years later, it still looks amazing. The use of real trains also adds to the authenticity of the film, making it feel a lot more alive and real. Another thing I really liked about the film is it was filmed in black and white. Even for 1964, a big production like this, being filmed in black and white, was becoming rarer and rarer, so I'm glad Frankenheimer chose to do this, because it adds so much style to the film, and honestly, black and white just works so well for World War II films, The Longest Day and Schindler's List being good examples of this. The Train is another great film that I highly recommend anyone check out. It reminds me a lot of Von Ryan's Express, another decent World War II train movie, although I actually prefer The Train now over Von Ryan's Express, now that I think about it. Gallipoli from 1981, directed by Peter Weir, was a film I had known about for an extremely long time, but I had never actually got around to watching the film until this year. It's definitely a film I will remember forever. The film's tagline especially staying with me: "From a place you've never heard of comes a story you'll never forget." The story of Gallipoli is certainly something I will never forget, focusing on two young lads who get themselves caught up into World War I, joining the Anzacs and being shipped off to Gallipoli, and in doing so, they encounter the true horror of war. While it may sound simple, the way the film builds up the characters around the story is something I think a lot of war films really miss the mark on. The film focuses as little on the war as possible and tries to show as much of the human side and the people fighting in it as it can. If you have seen 1917, it's similar, and 1917 gives me similar vibes to Gallipoli, but Gallipoli pulls it off so much better. The way the film shows the horrors of war in as little time as possible makes it one of the most emotionally gut-wrenching films I've ever watched, and as said earlier, is something that will stick with me forever. I don't think I can really discuss too much without ruining it, but you'll just have to take my word for it. Apart from that, the film is exceptionally well shot, having some great cinematography, with some of the scenes being downright beautiful. The use of Albanone's Adagio in G minor was a stroke of genius by whoever chose it, but that's something I can't really say for the rest of the film's soundtrack, which feels rather out of place. While the film does get some pretty big things wrong historically, the rest of the film more than makes up for it. I highly recommend Gallipoli. It's one of the best World War I films out there, a true story of friendship, adventure, and war. But this film is not just one to pop on randomly, as you really have to watch this film when you're emotionally in the right state of mind. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance from 1962, directed by the legend John Ford. This film has to be one of the greatest westerns I have ever seen, with an equally great cast, starring James Stewart, John Wayne, Lee Marvin, Edmund O'Brien, Lee Van Cleef, Vera Miles, and Woody Strode. While at first the film may seem simplistic or even cliché, seeming like a stereotypical western with its themes like good versus evil, civilization versus wilderness, and law versus lawlessness, it proves itself to be far beyond that the further it goes on, and when you dig deep and really think hard about what the film is trying to say, you really understand its complexities, and I got a greater appreciation for it. It's far from just being a black and white film, and instead more similar to Shades of Grey. I had a great comment from a user called Van Pelt on my Dessous Uzala video, who compared Dessous Uzala to The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and I recommend anyone who has seen both to go read it, as it's very topical to both films. Don't read the comment if you haven't seen both films, because it will spoil both of them. I recommend anybody watch The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, especially if you're looking for something more out of a western. High and Low from 1963, directed by another legend, Akira Kurosawa. Kurosawa is one of my favourite directors, and one of the few directors where I will watch all of his films regardless of subject matter. High and Low was actually one of his films I hadn't seen yet. I finally got to see it on the big screen in a cinema after there was an Akira Kurosawa festival on. It was promoting the new 4K restorations of the film, although I personally don't believe they were using the 4K restoration. Regardless of that, the film was exceptional, which is just what I expect from Kurosawa. High and Low actually excelled past my preconceived expectations for the film. The film starts rather slow, but really grabs you in and gets going, leading to some pretty tense and impactful moments. That train sequence was a key moment for me, and I found it to be really thrilling. The rest of the film was suspenseful, and had me totally hooked throughout. The story and characters work well together, and all of them feel necessary for the plot. The plot itself builds with you and allows you to take in the details along with the characters, which is something I always enjoy. I hate when films tell me everything and treats me as if I couldn't figure it out on my own or be able to keep up with what's going on. High and Low even has a bit of comedy, even though the film is very serious. The comedy works surprisingly well to alleviate some of the pent-up tension and gives you some lighter moments in what is a pretty dark film. It was also cool to see Toshiro Mifune in a role that wasn't a samurai for once. My only gripe with the film was I felt it went on longer than it should have, but other than that, I highly recommend High and Low, especially if you like Kurosawa's work and want to explore some other films he has done. Another Peter Weir film in Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World from 2003. This film was another film I had heard about quite a while ago, but just never got around to checking it out. My interest only grew after watching Gallipoli and rewatching Gladiator and seeing Russell Crowe's great performance in that. I thought, well, I haven't gone wrong with Peter Weir or Russell Crowe yet, so this should probably be good. And well, it was. It was way better than I expected. I never thought a cat and mouse chase between Napoleonic era ships around the South Atlantic Ocean would be as enjoyable and engaging as it was, but it was really good. From start to finish, I was eagerly engaged by the film and couldn't wait to see what happened next. Even in the duller scenes, it is easily carried by its great cast and script. The characters are the core of the film, just like Gallipoli, and the interactions between them bring you right into the world of the Napoleonic British Navy. I love the back and forths between Jack Aubrey and Dr. Stephen. Another thing that is similar to Gallipoli is the film having some tough scenes. Peter Weir doesn't shy away from showing us some of the darker and emotionally complex moments. Those moments add so much to the film and help build the drama, which is something you would realistically expect from a bunch of men trapped on a wooden ship for months or even years at a time without seeing their families or homes. Master and Commander also has a great but brutal battle scene, which is an amazing climax to end the film on. After watching it, I wish there was more scenes like it in other films. The same goes for the ship-to-ship combat that is shown. I just wish there was more of it because it's so good, but I understand it's quite difficult to do. Also, the sound was amazing and blew my ears away. Anyways, once again, I highly recommend another Peter Weir classic, and if you're interested in the Napoleonic Wars, it's a must-watch, not only for its epic ship-to-ship battles, but also the character drama the film has. It's a Wonderful Life from 1946, directed by Frank Capra. This is my first Frank Capra film I have ever seen, as a lot of his works are not really to my interest, but I had heard of the legendary status of It's a Wonderful Life, so thought it was worth checking out, and let's just say, it certainly lives up to its legendary status. This will probably be the last new film I watched this year, as I watched it on Christmas Eve, so the timing couldn't have been better. The film is such a thoughtful and well-crafted piece of art, having such an endearing and heartfelt story that it's hard not to feel uplifted and joyful when that ending bell starts ringing. While at first I was a bit apprehensive about the film, I slowly got more and more into it, really liking the character of George Bailey, played by the ever so talented James Stewart. His whole character arc was unusual to see in a Christmas movie, but such a pleasant surprise. I could really relate to him due to his struggles, and the breakdown he has is very real. Everyone goes through struggles in life, but seeing it in such a vivid way, you can't help but weep for him. It does pull at the heartstrings, but in a good way, and its emotional punches are well deserved and satisfying, not cheap at all. The film is a good, heartfelt tale about one man's struggle against all odds and putting his own happiness aside for the sake of others, which is something I really respect. One final high recommendation for anyone to watch the film, especially around Christmas time, which I think is the best time to watch it, but for the love of God, please don't watch the bastardized coloured version that Capra and Stewart fought against. Just watch the original black and white version. That does it for my top 10 list. If you have any opinions or thoughts on my list, and the films contained in it, I would love to hear them in the comments, especially if you agree or disagree with some of my takes.